Hello there everybody, my name is Bloomer Brown and welcome to episode 12 of KSP Retrograde, where my insatiable appetite for the development of rovers continues unabated. So yes, I have developed yet another rover, making use this time of the Mark II lander can, and essentially what I've done is deploy it in the configuration that basically removes the storage compartments on the side. We've previously seen this lander can deployed in the last episode as part of the Borealis outpost. So yeah, what I've done is basically pop on a load of scientific experiments, and I've decided to use this as a training exercise for our newest recruit, Kerbal, who we have taken on since deploying Bob Kerman out to the North Pole, because of course we do have redundancy in terms of our other crew members. We have got 2 pilots and 2 engineers, and having only 1 scientist really does limit us, especially should one of our crew not make a safe return to base. So yeah, we basically got Irgon out here, and she is going to test out her golfing skills while running the various experiments. And yeah, I'm basically going to have her do the usual thing of run around through the various biomes that are available to us here at the KSC, including maybe taking a little drive out towards the shoreline. So let's get her back inside and have a look at how this rover maneuvers. So yeah, the major problem at the moment is that we do not have any larger rover wheels unlocked, and it does kind of compromise the stability of this design. So hopefully once we get this little run around done, we should unlock enough science to be able to get hold of some more robust wheels. And since you've seen me carry out this before, I'd skip straight to when we recover, gathering ourselves 162 science, bringing our grand total up to 428, which is enough, incidentally, to unlock something very interesting for us. And of course, Kerbal gains a single experience point from that. And so yeah, back out on the launch pad again, we have another long duration mission, which is hopefully going to be able to generate a little bit of extra science for us. And as per usual, this mission is of course serving double duty, because yeah, we have yet another contract which, if this mission goes successfully, we should be able to collect on. So yes, we are heading up towards a high Kerbal orbit with this particular mission, and the reason for that will become apparent once we open up the payload fairing. And we managed to stage away our SRB successfully, and yes, once again my fat fingers have hit the spacebar a little bit too aggressively, and yeah, we end up jettisoning our first stage a little bit prematurely. Though it does appear that my time to apoapsis is actually increasing. We are up to 32 seconds and climbing, and yeah, basically that rocket was overbuilt for the very light payload that I am actually pushing up into high Kerbal orbit, and so I decided to see if I can actually make it on the upper stage of this launch vehicle. And this of course should technically be possible because we have an excess of delta V, somewhere up in the region of 4 kilometers per second remaining. So yeah, aiming for a 6,000 kilometer orbit, which should keep us out of range of the moon. I think that this vehicle should be able to make its orbit as long as I don't end up making any further mistakes along the way. So yeah, coming out to the map view, we can see our apoapsis growing there quite quickly, and yeah, as we get up closer and closer, that time to apoapsis will increase exponentially. And there we go, hitting an apoapsis of about 7,000 kilometers, and there you can see me kind of fiddling around with it a little bit. I did want to aim for around 6,000, but because of the nature of the payload, 7,000 is going to be just as good. The only thing I'm anxious to avoid is, of course, a moon encounter encounter which would end up kicking us off into deep space, or even worse, sending us crashing back to the surface of Kerbal. Anyway, while I have been blabbing away about my failed launch, we have actually deployed the payload fairing and getting a look at what is hiding within. So yeah, we are launching our first space telescope. This is of course courtesy of the Tarsier Space Technologies mod, which adds a whole suite of experiments including space telescope and laser powered spectrometers for deployment on the surface of planets in the form of a ChemCam. So yeah, this is actually one of my go-to mods whenever Kerbal Space Program updates, and it really does add quite an interesting suite of experiments. And sadly, it's one that doesn't seem to get a hell of a lot of attention on YouTube, and so yeah, I'm quite happy to actually have it as part of this playthrough. So yeah, at 4 times normal speed, we reach our apoapsis and begin to circularize this orbit. And yeah, it is worth pointing out actually that this particular mission is probably doing triple duty, or at least has other uses, let's just say. So I have mounted on the front of it a communications relay, because yeah, we are interested in heading out beyond the Kerbal system, and yeah, it would be really useful to have some sort of long-range communications when the time comes. Anyway, yeah, with the orbit set, it is of course time to deploy the telescope itself and start taking a look out into the solar system. Now, it is worth pointing out that there are actually 2 telescopes as part of this pack, and this is actually the smaller of the 2, which unlocks a little bit earlier in the tech tree. And as it happens, we have a contract to take a picture of the sun, and I am hoping that this telescope actually suffices. So yeah, we bring up the display as you see, and kind of center it around to take a nice picture. And yeah, we realize that the burning smell is our corneas as we so yeah, we're going to transmit that off back to Kerbal, and hopefully we will gain some science from it once the transmission is complete. 95%, 100%, there we go. And we have some science at it, and we also complete our contract, earning us 74,000 and yeah, another 100 science. So yeah, the range on this telescope isn't quite as good as the slightly larger version. Taking pictures of Eeloo, for example, wouldn't really be possible using this particular unit, but we can swing it around and have a look at some of the closer targets. I think actually the limit of this would be out to Duna. I don't think we could even get a picture of Jewel with this, but it is going to generate a little bit of science for us, and yeah, pro tip is to set the control point as the telescope itself, which does make pointing it at targets just a little bit easier. So yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of time to take out some of the targets in the local system, such as Kerbal, the Moon, and perhaps even Minmus. I may end up leaving Duna out of the mix for the moment until such time as we actually have a contract to pick up some scientific data from that, and perhaps from Ike as well. Anyway, I could of course spend the rest of the episode messing around with my shiny new toy, but instead I think what I'm going to do is jump over to another rocket launch, which is of course bound for the space station we began building out in the last episode. And courtesy of the science unlocked by the space telescope, I have at last unlocked a crucial part for the next module for this space station. A simple structure, remember, which on the face of it is not really that remarkable. However, it does allow me to actually mount a greenhouse component that has been unlocked for quite some time in the game, and I have been really looking forward to being able to deploy it. So as I have been saying about the space station, it is essentially going to serve as a testbed for long duration missions out into deep space. So what I have essentially created is something of a life support module, which is based around growing plants in space. So yeah, I have mounted a couple of greenhouses on this, which are going to basically take the waste generated by the Kerbals and use it as fertilizer for growing crops, which has the knock-on effect of producing oxygen and food. And once the technology is proven, the hope is that we will be able to deploy self-sustaining bases on the surface of planets, and perhaps in the deep and distant future we will be able to further the technology and create vast colony ships to head out into the stars, though that may be saved for the release of KSP2, which sadly has been delayed for another good while at least. I am forecasting that we will not be seeing KSP2 until at least 2021. Anyway, back to the launch itself. Which hasn't been timed as well as some of the others. The space station is going to be lagging behind us ever so slightly, though that is not going to create too many problems for us because, of course, orbital rendezvous is something that we are well experienced with at this stage. So passing in orbit with this, we actually end up getting a little bit too far ahead, and so I attempted to plop down a maneuver node to deal with this, but yeah, what I ultimately end up doing is making use of the RCS system on the upper stage to basically tweak down the encounter just a little bit and bring ourselves into within spitting distance, and yeah, just wait for these things to come in a little bit closer to each other. And yeah, at 8 times normal speed, you can see me actually handling the rendezvous with this thing and getting on with the docking. And yeah, once again, I have neglected to put RCS thrusters on the payload itself, and yeah, I end up having this weird sort of rotational oscillation that plagued the last launch up here as well. And I really do think that for the next launch I will need to seriously consider putting a little more thought into designing these things. So yeah, it really is a wrestling match trying to get this thing pointed and keep it pointed in the right direction. And yeah, as you can see, I am kind of dancing with the space station in orbit, and you know, with solar panels and radiators extended, I'm of course worried about knocking things off. And yeah, already you can see that the rotation on this thing is actually completely in the wrong orientation, because those radiator panels will extend quite a bit. I've mostly included them because I am not entirely sure how much heat the wastewater scrubbers and the greenhouses will actually generate when they are in operation. Anyway, I finally managed to get this thing under control, and jumping back to normal speed, we can actually watch these two spacecraft docking, and yeah, coming in ever so slowly at about 0.1 meters per second. You can actually see just how slowly things were moving during this docking, and yeah, just how careful I had to be. And yeah, once we get in, we kiss the space station, and I immediately switch off the RCS and SAS in order to allow the magnets on the docking ports to take effect and pull us in for a hard dock, which immediately sends the space station wobbling. So yeah, perhaps the most challenging docking we have had so far in this series, and yeah, it hasn't actually gone all that well. And in fact, I am not really pleased with the rotation of the various modules that are coming up onto the space station. And yeah, if we extend the radiator panel, yeah, we can see that it is you know, sort of at an unpleasing angle, let's just say. So yeah, it may be a case that I will end up coming up again and basically rotating these modules ever so slightly to get them sort of pointed in a better orientation, though I do not think that there is enough monopropellant left on this upper stage to begin doing that. So what I think we're going to do is basically send this on its way. We're going to decouple it from the space station and basically go and deorbit it. Incidentally, this time I have decided to try and make this a reusable part. I have mounted parachutes on this and we are going to attempt to recover it. Zipping forward and following our deorbit burn, we start catching the atmosphere just a little bit, and it turns out that this is relatively stable aerodynamically speaking. At least it does seem to want to come in engine first, and as we start coming down, I begin using the engine on and off to try and slow me and keep the re-entry heating to a minimum. So I think the initial periapsis was somewhere around 40 kilometers, and the hope with that is that we will kind of spend a little bit more time in the upper atmosphere and have a slightly shallower descent. Though, as you can see, re-entry heating is taking effect, and so what I start to do is to try and use the main engine, because we do have plenty of fuel left, to try and kill off some of my velocity before we start hitting the thicker atmosphere. And you can also see me angling the spacecraft up ever so slightly, which does push the orbit along and also means that I will end up staying higher for slightly longer. Anyway, getting down below 30 kilometers, we managed to slow our speed to less than 1 kilometer per second, and we at last get the green light to deploy our drogue chutes, which admittedly don't have much of an effect, and so we give a little bit more on the engine and manage to deploy our main chutes as well. And I'm not actually entirely sure where the signal to run this spacecraft is coming from, but we do seem to have some sort of connection, and that is a lucky thing, because I do not believe that these parachutes are actually going to be able to slow us down all that much, even when they reach full deployment. We are still pretty close to 10 meters per second. And so what I think I am going to have to do is basically make use of the main engine to make sure that we slow down in time before hitting the water. Thankfully, water physics has had something of an overhaul with the later versions of Kerbal space program, and the crazy physics and sudden explosions that we had in previous versions of the game are no longer really much of a concern. And so, dropping out of time warp, we begin closing the distance down to less than 20 meters above the water, and we start to pogo a little bit. And successful touchdown at just under 2 meters per second, I believe, and the booster flips over onto its side, and I don't think we actually lost any parts. And so yes, our first recoverable stage, and all we have to do is swim out and collect it. And with that, I think I am going to once again say thank you very much for tuning in. You have been watching Bloomer Brown on YouTube, and I will see you next time.